Elemental reactions make Genshin's battle system shine. A better understanding of how they work makes the whole game more fun, but they're badly explained in the game itself. One key aspect, which is often misunderstood, is elemental mastery. Let's take a look at what it does and how you can take advantage of it to make the game more fun. Before we explore elemental mastery, let's quickly recap exactly what an elemental reaction is. When we use an elemental attack in Genshin, it applies that element to the enemy in the form of a status known as an aura. We can see which elemental aura an enemy currently has via the icon floating above their head. The aura decays over time and eventually disappears. Auras are surprisingly nuanced and subtle system, which we'll talk about more in more detail in a future video. When you apply a different element to an enemy who already has an active aura, those two elements react with one another, or at least they usually do. There are some elements which don't interact with each other. If the two elements do react with one another, most reactions increase the damage our character causes, often by a huge amount. The order in which we apply the elements does not change the reaction which happens. For example, Pyro plus Hydro always equals Vaporize, although the order can affect the strength of the reaction and how much aura it consumes. Another layer of complexity, which we'll also explore in a separate video, is the attack's internal cooldown, or ICD, which determines how often it can apply its element, but for now we can ignore that. So, where does elemental mastery come into this? EM is the stat which means how good is this character at controlling elemental reactions, so it's pretty important. The first thing to note here is that while it takes two characters to set up and trigger a reaction, we actually only need to look at the EM of one of the characters. The stats of the character who originally applied the aura are ignored completely. Instead, the character who attacks second and actually triggers the reaction is the one whose stats matter. Next, the type of reaction is also important. There are three distinct categories of reaction, which we call amplifying, transformative, and additive. While each pair of elements has a slightly different formula or other unique features, these categories make it a lot easier to think about things. Elemental mastery plays a key part in all three categories, though it's far more important in some than others. To illustrate this, we'll show some examples of characters' damage in 4 scenarios for each category. We'll show both the base damage and reaction damage with no equipment at all, and then we'll show the base and reaction damage again with equipment which gives around 1000 EM. Note that we picked 1000 EM since it's a typical target for a highly EM focused build. In reality, this would likely be far too much EM for most characters. Amplifying reactions feel like the most intuitive type of reaction, or at least the most straightforward. There are currently only 2 amplifying reactions, Vaporize and Melt. An amplifying reaction works as an extra multiplier, which directly alters the damage caused by the triggering action. It makes the numbers bigger. The size of the reaction multiplier generally depends on 2 things, the character's elemental mastery and the order in which the elements were applied. In our example here, without any EM equipment, Kokomi's base damage doubles when she causes a Vaporize reaction. With an EM-focused build, her damage more than quadruples. Since these reactions multiply the action's original damage numbers, a character triggering an amplifying reaction will benefit from investing into all of the stats which affect their damage. This means they care about character levels, talent levels, crit stats, elemental damage bonus, attack, or the equivalent if they scale of a different stat, and so on. As a result, while elemental mastery is still a highly valuable stat for these reactions, it's often overshadowed by the rest of the build. A lot of people focus far too much on crit for these builds and end up limiting their own damage as a result. A character built for an amplifying reaction would instead benefit from a decent amount of EM, even if it results in a lower crit value. Often 200 to 300 EM feels like a good target in balance with the rest of their stats, at least aiming for 100 minimum, but the other stats are still essential. Transformative reactions are a little less intuitive, but are by far the most common type of reaction. This includes overloaded, superconduct, electrocharged, burning, shattered, swirl, bloom, hyperbloom, and burgeon. A transformative reaction adds a completely separate damage number to the screen and does not alter the damage caused by the triggering action. These reactions care about 2 things only, the triggering character's level and the elemental mastery. In this example, without equipment, Kokomi's base damage remains the same, but the electrocharge reaction adds a separate instance of damage which is a little under 2 times the size of the original hit. With the EM build, this separate damage instance is almost 4 times the size of the original hit. Transformative reactions completely ignore the vast majority of stats and do not benefit from crit. As a result, characters optimized for these reactions are perfectly capable if you just level them up as high as you can and throw as much elemental mastery at them as possible. You don't even need to level their talents past level 1. In the past, most of these reactions were thought of as comparatively weak, and the best teams in the game were focused on the 2 amplifying reactions. While this may have been a little unfair to some of these reactions, for example, electrocharge teams were surprisingly powerful even back then, the release of Dendro introduced Hyperbloom, which is arguably become the most popular reaction in game. It's important to reiterate that these reactions only care about the stats of the character who triggers the reaction. This means that in most Hyperbloom teams, for example, only the Electro characters triggering the blooms actually need a full EM build. Everyone else can have whatever build suits their personal needs best, either for extra damage or to help buff the Hyperbloom reaction driver. Additive reactions are comparatively new and can also feel a little counterintuitive. The only additive reactions currently in the game are the catalyzed reactions, involving Dendro and Electro. An additive reaction adds a flat damage buff to the triggering action's damage number, and just like an amplifying reaction, it directly alters the damage caused by the triggering action. It also makes the number bigger. The size of the reaction itself depends only on the character's level and their elemental mastery. Here, without equipment, Nahida's base damage number more than doubles when she triggers a spread reaction. With equipment, her damage more than triples, including the crit hits. While additive reactions themselves care about the same stats as transformative reactions, the overall damage output of a character triggering these actions is affected by all the things. As a result, they have more in common with amplifying reactions. They care about talent levels, crit stats, elemental damage, attack, and so on, but all have strong preference for a good amount of elemental mastery and a high character level as well. A build focused on boosting an additive reaction would look largely similar to an amplifying reaction build, with a decent spread of investment into all the relevant stats, though it can be worthwhile to aim for a little higher EM than usual. The quicken reactions have an interesting benefit in that the reaction itself does not have an internal cooldown, which results in a higher damage output than we might expect. This is why Dendro did such a great job of helping characters like Keqing, who suffered from the limitations of the older reactions. There are also a couple of special cases worth mentioning. The freeze reaction completely ignores EM, so characters in freeze teams generally do not need any at all. The only exception to this would be a Chongyun built for shatter damage, but the shatter reaction is so weak that it's not something worth aiming for. Geo is also a bit of a special case. First of all, Geo does not apply an aura, so it is always the triggering element in any of its reactions. More importantly, Geo's only reaction is Crystallize, which sucks the aura off the enemy to create an elemental shard. If you pick up that shard, you get a shield. The strength of this shield scales based on the character's level and EM. It uses the same scaling as transformative reactions. Again, this is fairly underwhelming and not worth aiming for currently. Swirl is particularly valuable. Anemo also does not apply an aura and is always the triggering element. Anemo's only reaction is Swirl, which causes damage as a transformative reaction. The interesting part of Swirl is that it also sucks in the elemental aura it reacted with and spreads it to further damage other enemies and potentially cause more reactions. This is particularly fun in a soup team, where you get a huge number of damage instances from one attack, with all the elements reacting together. Swirl characters benefit from a lot of EM, so it's common to go all in for them. When figuring out which characters need the most EM in your team, it unfortunately depends on a huge number of details. Which characters are in the team? Which attacks are they using? Who's attacking last? How many times does everyone apply their element? How much do they apply? What are their ICDs? And so on. It can get a little overwhelming, but it's generally worth building a lot on Anemo characters and Electro Hyperbloom triggers, a little on most other characters, or none at all on Cryo characters in freeze teams, or Geo characters. Beyond that, it's worth either asking for advice, reading guides, or experimenting until you have a good feel for it. There's a whole host of different ways to increase a character's EM, including weapon stats and passives, artifact sets, main stats and substats, character ascension stats, dendro resonance, or buffs from various character talents. Never throw away an artifact with an elemental mastery main stat. They are extremely rare and highly valuable. This is another reason EM's priority is highly dependent on the team. It's possible to get a very strong EM stat from buffs alone, which can free up your reaction trigger's build investment to focus on other areas. Elemental reactions can get very complicated once you look beneath the surface, but once you start figuring them out, they can be incredibly satisfying to play around with. Knowing a little more about elemental mastery can go a long way to making them all make sense. If you have any questions, please ask either in the comments or on my Twitch streams or in Discord, and we'll help you figure it out. Until next time!